The students, remember, have been trained, right? And so when they're dragged off the stools, they curl up, protect their vital organs, protect their head, and they stay nonviolent. What would Malcolm X say all these demonstrators are doing?
You should give them back.
That's right. They are degrading themselves, right? Disrespecting themselves, he would say. In every city where the sit-ins spread to, white people join them. Now, of course, it's always a very small minority of white people, right? But in every city where there were sit-ins, there were at least a few brave white people, often young ones, who went to join with the black students. Were most of them Southerners? No, lots of them were white Northerners who had come down to the South to go to college. But a few of them actually were Southerners. So it's not ever like it's everybody, you know? People can always think for themselves. Is this store making any money?
No.
Nope. And as these sit-ins dragged on for days and even weeks, who became the biggest advocates for changing the policies?
The owner of those stores.
You got it. The drugstore owners became the biggest advocates for changing the policies. Because they want to go back to making money. Because of that dynamic, most of the sit-ins ended with service. Most of, not all, but most of the sit-ins ended with black customers being able to get a cup of coffee or a hamburger. There's Diane Nash sitting at the lunch counter in Nashville where they had started the campaign. So again, they were not all successful, but most of them were. Could you use these same tactics somewhere besides a lunch counter?
Sure.
Absolutely. So they conducted read-ins at libraries where, you simply go in and start reading a book. You get arrested for that. They carried out wade-ins at swimming pools or swim-ins. They had skate-ins at the roller skating rinks. And yes, they even had shit-ins to try to integrate public restrooms. They did not call them that to the media, but that's what they called them among themselves. Shit-ins. So if any of you have ever seen Dave Chappelle's bit, it's actually kind of right. Any of you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen the Dave Chappelle bit? Anybody? Check that out. It's good stuff. So they use the same tactics at lots of other places as well. Students were so empowered by what they had done that they wanted their own group, their own organization. Do they, all these kids with all this youthful energy and ambition and enthusiasm, do they want SCLC or the NAACP telling them what to do?
No.
Hell no.
No. They want to make their own choices. So later that year, they met at a convention to form their own group. That group became SNCC. That's how you say that. You would not say the SNCC. People would either think you were a square or a narc. All right? It's pronounced SNCC. SNCC. It stands for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Of those 4 words, which 2 are the most important, the ones you can't forget? Right, student and nonviolent. When they gathered for this convention, these were students who were veterans of the sit-in campaigns. They had just gone through all these arrests and protests and beatings. And they were advised by a veteran of the movement named Ella Baker. Somebody that we talked about way back in the 1930s when she was an organizer for the NAACP back in the 30s and in World War II. Ella Baker is not a a college student herself. She's been around working on these issues for decades. So the students saw her as somebody with wisdom that they should listen to. She was one of those people like Randolph who had been trying to get mass protests started for decades. And if you were these kids engaging in mass protest, would you want to listen to somebody who'd been telling people to do it for 30 years?
Sure.
Right. So Baker told the college students that they should not let the movement become built around one person. She said that if the movement wound up built around one charismatic leader, the movement would collapse if something happened to that leader. The movement, she tells the students, don't let this movement become built around one charismatic leader. If it is, the whole movement will collapse if something happens to that leader. Who's Baker talking about?
Garvey.
She's talking about Martin Luther King. She can already see how the media calls it King's movement.
Even maybe Garvey, like Garvey, the movement died.
No, that's in a way, in a previous generation, that's a good kind of example, because right, the whole thing dissipated when he disappeared, right? So she's saying now, let's not let that same kind of thing happen. Instead, she told the students to practice group-centered leadership, which is a great term. Group-centered leadership. The first leader of SNCC was Marion Barry, one of the veterans of the Nashville sit-ins. Marion Barry became the first leader of SNCC. But being a leader of SNCC was not the same as like being a leader of the SCLC. Marion Barry had very little... Yes?
How do you write Marion Barry?
You wrote it down a couple slides ago.
I forgot.
B-A-R-R-Y. So, being the leader of SNCC was not really the same as being the leader of SCLC. So it seemed like this organization would work by somebody at the top just giving orders. No, that's not what they're trying to be about, right? Instead, SNCC wanted to empower black people from local communities. Maybe I could try it like this. Think of it this way. They did not want to send leaders out to help black communities. They wanted to send people out to black communities and find the leaders who were already there. Does that distinction make sense? So SCLC kind of thinks we're going to send out leaders and they'll organize communities. It's very top-down. SNCC is bottom-up. And maybe this is the easiest way to think of the distinction, all right? If we were all a black community somewhere in the South, there are now two groups we can call to help us organize a protest campaign. SNCC and who? SCLC. If an SCLC organizer comes to our community, they will get everybody together and they'll say, all right, everybody, here's what we need to do. If a SNCC organizer comes to our community, they'll get everybody together and say, all right, everybody, what do you think we need to do? And what's the big difference there?
They're taking in others' perspectives.
That's right. They're really trying to empower the people there in the community and make them feel like, who's everything coming from?
From them.
From them. Right. So SNCC was much more bottom up, while SCLC was top down. SNCC was interracial from the beginning. So remember that we said there had been white students in the sit-in campaigns, right? And they were among the founders of SNCC. And SNCC was proud of being an interracial group of young people. They were proud of that. And they, in a way, they were trying to show the nation, we as young people are better at this than you old folks are. we can get along with each other better than you guys could. These, at their founding convention, the initial organizers of SNCC, and remember, these are kids, younger than many of you, right? Younger than, they're college kids. And they said, we are willing to be arrested. We are willing to be beaten. We are willing to give our freedom and our lives for this cause. And they're 18 and 19 years old. In 1960, after these sit-ins have been rippling through the country all year long, came the presidential election in November. Which way are black voters leaning?
Republican.
You said Republican, you said Democrat. Why are they both right?
Because like Eisenhower, like he showed that he could like help the black when there was something in Little Rock. I feel like.
Exactly. Remember, so black people had been much more strongly towards the Democrats, but kind of came back with Eisenhower, right? So black voters were up for grabs. Black voters were willing to vote for either party if either party would show them something. You know? Will either one of you guys say something about civil rights? The Democrats nominated John F. Kennedy. The Republicans nominated Richard Nixon, who had been Eisenhower's vice president. Nixon refused to make any statements in favor of civil rights. And so black people kept waiting for Nixon to say something. He could have just said, I will try to enforce the law like President Eisenhower did. But he wouldn't even do that. Kennedy did almost nothing until late in the campaign, just several weeks before the election. Martin Luther King, had been arrested in Atlanta. Remember in the sit-ins we mentioned earlier? So King was in an Atlanta jail. And Kennedy publicly called King's wife. Like a sympathy call. And he said to King's wife, I just want you to know, we think what's happening to your husband down there is wrong. And he implied, he didn't quite say this directly, but he implied that if he were president, things would be different. That's not really much, but what is it compared to Eisenhower?
Something.
You got it. So black voters broke towards Kennedy just before the election. And Kennedy needed them. He won one of the closest elections in American history. And he got 80 to 90% of the black vote. If 80 to 90% of black voters in the North and West had gone for Nixon, what happens?
Nixon wins.
Nixon would have been president. Right. So could Kennedy think, wow, I owe my job to black voters? That would be one way he could look at it. He did not look at it that way.
The 80 or 90 is in the South or in the whole country?
The whole country. But remember, there really aren't many black voters at all in the South, right? So we're really talking mostly about black people in the North and West. How much time do we have?
40 seconds.
All right. In his first cabinet meeting on civil rights issues, the topic was brought up, and Kennedy's first question was, what can we do to make these Negroes quiet down? That's the approach that he'll bring to it as president. Not, what can we do to enforce the Constitution? Or what can we do to protect rights for every American? But, what can we do to make these Negroes quiet down? And Kennedy will have to grapple with that next week.